Or how can I ever approach Allah with that mindset? And when everything is going good, alhamdulillah, we're praising Allah, we're thanking Him, we're thinking well of Him. But what happens when things are going not so well? We're being challenged. We're going through tests. And shaitan comes and starts to attack within our own nafs, our own desires, and our own character flaws. And we start to doubt the blessings of Allah. We start to question what are the reasons that things are taking place. So that's why in another hadith al-Qudsi, the one that's really well known, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, that was related from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? I am as. So this is something that we as human beings, especially believers, under the way that we view Allah. I've come across, brothers and sisters, many born Muslims who have struggled in their faith, as I'm sure you will find in your journey of educating others, be it converts or born Muslims. But what I found unique about born Muslims is the way that they look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Many of them, especially the younger generation, where this idea that Allah is all about punishing, His wrath, the day of judgment, and this fear, which again is a reality. We don't deny that Allah punishes. We don't deny that Allah has a wrath. We don't deny these things. But so many young brothers and sisters, and we're talking about young teenagers and young professionals, and even, I mean, I'm an older person now, I'm in my late 40s, but people who are in their 30s, they still struggle with this. And the mistakes that they make, they don't feel that Allah will forgive them. There is a feeling of not having hope. Even some, and this is an extreme case, but people I have come across a fair amount, and it's unfortunate, but it's a reality, a fair amount of young brothers and sisters born into the faith, born into Muslim families, that it becomes so heavy on them that they leave the deen. Or they have left it for a short period of time. And that is because they had an improper understanding of who Allah is. And they go deep and sometimes in a dark place where they don't remember Allah's names, His beautiful names and attributes. Allah being Al-Latif, Allah being Al-Kareem, Allah being Al-Wadud, Allah being Al-Rahman, Al-Ghafur, Al-Ghaffar, and we could go down the line of His beautiful names. That we're like, man, when I'm talking to, and I'm saying we because other of my peers, when we're talking to these young brothers and sisters, it's as if these names had almost left them, like they didn't exist. So what happens is that when we don't think well of Allah, then we'll come across and live our life in whatever way that we view Him to be. Either for some people, Allahu Musta'an, non-existent, or He's there, but we don't pay too, it's not something that we're putting too much time into serving Him. And it goes down the line when it comes to He's only about wrath, about punishment, about allowing all these negative things or evils to happen. And many people go down this dark road. And a way of connecting that with our own personal selves, making sure, again, when people are not thinking well of you and I, is it about the human being, or is it about the way that Allah will view me? How am I with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How am I viewing Him? That's why when you continue reading the hadith, it talks about the way that you get closer to Allah. Allah then mentions after thinking, I am as my servant thinks of me, and my servant doesn't get closer to me then, except that he starts to then do his obligatory deeds and then goes down the line. So the very nature of improving our viewpoint of Allah, for lack of better words, and how we view him is our own connection to him by doing good deeds. And one of the greatest deeds that you all are doing, inshallah, we all continue to do, is going on this path of talab al-ilm, right? The path of learning. The more that we are conscious, and one of the first subject matters I spoke about, or the first time that I was here when we opened this series, I started off with talking about the purification of our intention, and how many times were my teachers and my mashaykh always talking to us students, no matter what class we were learning. It could be dealing with the seerah of the Prophet ﷺ, or it could be dealing with the Abbasid period. The teacher would start off with our intention. So if my intention is to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and I'm here trying to get closer to him by learning about him, then the application comes when it's time for me to either improve in my deeds. Alhamdulillah, if Allah allow me to establish my 5 pillars, be it my intention, for example, Hajj, or if I'm not qualified or I'm not obligated to pay the zakat, that I at least give sadaqah. I'm fasting, I'm doing my daily prayers, I'm learning about Allah and his messenger, alayhi salatu wasalam. Then what am I doing after that? Well, I'm learning. I'm putting time in to learn about the religion of Islam. Okay, does it end there? How is my review? And one of the hardest things, no matter if it's memorizing Quran or memorizing the rules of Arabic language or whatever you're learning, review is the most challenging thing. We can gain a lot of information, and you brothers and sisters have put in a lot of time the past few months, but you have to ask yourself the extra, the nawafil, when it comes to learning, what am I doing? And am I disciplining myself to review? Because it's always great to get the new information. Wow, I'm learning the usul of tafsir, and I'm learning usul of fiqh, and I'm learning about the the leadership or the time of Ali radiallahu anhu, or the challenges that the Muslims were dealing with in the early stages after the death of the 4 Khulafa Rashidin. And all this information is great and it's mashallah, but what happens when I'm going back to learn and review, and am I reviewing it to get good grades? I mean, that's good and all, it's all good. But am I truly doing it, though, to get closer to Allah? And it goes back to, this all helps in having good thoughts of our Lord. Because when we are challenged, we have to ask ourselves, not it's Allah's fault, obviously, we're not going to do that, or my parents' fault, or my teacher's fault, or whoever else. I'm taking responsibility of not putting in the time and effort to do the nawafil, to do the extra when it comes to learning the deen of al-Islam. What am I truly doing to maximize my potential and maximize my talent in order for me to be the best student of knowledge that I can be? So the student of knowledge is going to be tested a little bit differently at times than those who are just dealing with their daily life 9 to 5, where many of possibly your peers are facing many other different types of challenges when it comes to the outside world and the word I'm looking for is when you're dealing with the different temptations that are out there. For us, many times, and I don't like to say that we're separate from the other people, But going on this path is a little bit different. And what I'm getting at, brothers and sisters, is that the challenges that we have to face many times is these internal issues that many people are not. How many of us are going to be talking to someone else about my viewpoint of Allah or how I think of Allah or my challenges and my connection with Allah? Sometimes we're even challenged to feel like, should I, as a student of knowledge or a educator or a community leader, should I even be feeling this way? How are people going to, again, how are people going to look at me? I'm supposed to be the community leader, educator. I'm the head of household, or I'm the most knowledgeable in my family. How am I going to be the one? Oh man, my difficulties or my challenges. We're the ones who at times are being faced with these issues of hasad, right? I'm sure you've heard, or either heard or going to hear about these issues of jealousy, or these issues of hatred, or whatever other internal issues we have. It usually begins with our own relationship with Allah, even to the point where we might not go on the extreme that I was talking about of how people view Allah and the wrath and the punishment and all that. We may feel like it's just He's Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim and He's always going to be so merciful that we become comfortable. And we almost think as if Allah will deal with us differently than everybody else. And that's an whole other mindset when it comes to how we view Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we feel as students of knowledge or people learning this deen as something better than everyone else. And I mentioned this in the previous uh, sitting. I'm not expecting people to remember. I'm just saying, just reminding myself as well, is that these are the challenges that many of my peers deal with when it comes to how people view them with the whole issue of social media and how that affects in the way that we all speak and how we feel we need to be viewed, to the point where it starts affecting our iman if people are not coming to our classes. These are the discussions that we have. You know, some support groups that are out there for imams or educators, that you almost see the group feeling almost ashamed that they're feeling this way because, quote unquote, we should know better as if we're not human beings. And going back to the one who knew better, Shaitan, he knew better, but he chose a different path. Knowing better doesn't mean that we're always going to do better. So the key in all this, brothers and sisters, is when it comes to our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when it comes to having husn dhan, is making sure that we're just not learning this information just to gain more knowledge and just keep it to ourselves or even just teach it to others, but make sure that we are internalizing this information and really pointing out, where am I being challenged when it comes to my viewpoint of Allah when it comes to these things. Some of you may not know this. Some here who are parents realize that's one of the biggest challenges an adult has when it comes to their children. When their child is not doing what is expected of them, we make it about ourselves. I'm a bad parent. Some of us, I didn't do this. What could I have done better? And so on and so forth. And we forget about, again, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is as-sabur. How Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in my journey, when I was young, or when we all were young, whatever we were doing, those mistakes that we made when we were younger didn't define us. And wherever we are now, obviously we could always be better, but we're thankful and we forget. Again, we forget about this. And so we forget that Allah brought us, and He was so merciful that He brought us to this point that when it comes to our own children, we don't have that same thought of Allah is going to take care of them, because we don't humble ourselves and give it to Allah to take care of them. Obviously, we are responsible as parents. Exactly the same thing goes when it comes to your students, whenever you do have them. You have some responsibility in the way that you are. All this, brothers and sisters, connects back to the way we look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and making sure that we are connecting our good thoughts of Allah with our servitude to Him. Just read that hadith and how it connects to that. That's why the Prophet ﷺ said in the other hadith that I mentioned in the beginning, from the best, right, of someone's Islam or ibadah, worship is to think well of Allah. So that's the highest level of worship, the way that I constantly view my Lord subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the best names to constantly review, again, in my opinion, Allah knows best, is his name Al-Hakim. He's wise in how he has structured everything. He's the most wise in the way that he has brought judgment down. And the more experience you have, the more connection you will have with the statements of the great scholars of the past when it comes to their own journey or the advice that they gave their own students. It's a whole different world viewpoint when we're in our 40s and 50s than someone who's in their 20s. That doesn't mean that you being in your 20s doesn't have any weight. No, is that you're going to have these challenges that are going to happen. So the best thing to do is discipline yourself now before being put out there or being encouraged to go out to inform and educate others when you're going to be dealing again with the challenges of the people. Is it okay if I get some water? So sorry. Oh, good. My bad. Glasses. You know, my mention, sister. Sorry, sister. I didn't realize it. So, what happens when we start to discipline ourselves with having good thoughts of Allah? Then, inshallah, it will resonate when it comes to having HUsn Dhan with human beings. One of the best stories to really see how the opposite of this, being suspicious, almost destroyed a community. And I won't go too long into the story, but remembering the story of the slander of our mother Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha. When one recaps her story and the challenges that she went through, radiallahu anha, may Allah be pleased with her, we may tend to forget just the origins of the story, the companions and the Prophet and the companions being in Medina. So we know at that time now studying the Seerah that not only were the hypocrites hating on the Prophet and the Muslims, but also they had factions from the Jews and outside of that as well, wanting to destroy the Deen of al-Islam. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioning in Surah An-Nur, verse number 12 in its meaning, reminding the believers that when you heard the slander, wasn't it not for the believing men and the believing women, right, to think good of one another? That they had thought good of one another, because it wasn't just the hypocrites and the Jews and others who were involved in the slander of our mother radiallahu anha, but the Muslims got caught up into it as well, meaning the believers did as well. They got caught up thinking and believing in this erroneous and evil claim about our mother. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran, that the believing men and believing women, this was the time to give husna dhan to their mother, the wife of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. This was the perfect time to implement giving the benefit of the doubt to a human being, a young woman. Of the worst sins that anyone can do, of the major sins that exist in Islam, is to slander a virgin girl. It could be punished in the hellfire for doing so. It's not a small thing. So, taking it back a step, when it comes to our interactions with human beings, it is incumbent upon us to constantly give husna dhan, the benefit of the doubt, to starting with our brothers and sisters. Imam Shafi'i rahimahullah ta'ala, one of the great scholars of Islam, I'm sure you've all heard of him. He mentioned this one time to some of his students, saying that he, when being ridiculed by someone, will look at that person and try to hear what truth was coming from that individual, even if it didn't sound good. Now, when I read this, it really, being open, it's like I had to check myself, because it's very, very difficult to have someone come at you and use more of the terminology of not just ridiculing you, but insulting you. We're human beings. Nobody wants to be insulted. But Imam Shafi had enough confidence in himself, rahmatullah alayh, and that's an amazing thing. That's from Allah. He had enough confidence in himself that he's like, okay, this person is insulting me, coming at me in a real quote unquote foul manner. But what is the truth within all of that? Is he, forget how he's saying it, is what he's saying. So he gave, or he would give people who would ridicule him, and he's an imam, and one of the greatest believers that ever lived. A person that people continue to say his name and say rahimahullah, and continue to study his madhab, his way of understanding Islam. So if we have been given these examples, like our mother Aisha, like Imam Shafi rahimahullah, and the way that they would deal with people, or the way that they would face these challenges, then us, wherever we are in front of Allah, we should be prepared not only to face, like I mentioned in the beginning, how we're going to be spoken to, but also how we will deal with others. So now when a person is coming at you, brother and sister, and they're coming at you in a very rough manner, this is where all these hours of putting in the work come into play. When you're giving a talk and everybody's mashallah smiling, and then there's that one person in the corner. As you're walking out, there's almost always one person in the corner, and it's all good. And sometimes they'll say it in a respectful way. They'll give you some feedback, mashallah, feedback, good word, right? But sometimes they'll speak to you almost as, who are you? Maybe you don't have enough experience, or speak to you almost as, again, an uncle or auntie, to their nephew or niece, or they're just not having a good day. I recall a few times where giving a khutbah, you don't know how and some information, how it would resonate with the people who are listening. And that's why it's such a great responsibility, no matter if it's a sermon or if it's a talk, that people are taking time to listen to you. It's not something to take lightly. So I remember speaking about something dealing with dua to the Prophet, something to that effect. and how some of us, we came from Christianity and we found it a bit different when we heard that people would make dua to the Prophet ﷺ. An example that was given to me was like, you're coming into a beautiful house, but you jumping out the window. Why will we, why will we leave calling to Jesus and then just go calling to the Prophet ﷺ? There's not much difference. I didn't know that someone was going to get offended coming down in this older gentleman, and he's just telling me how I could be telling people this and with his finger in my face and all that. And you have to be also be careful and not ever, and this is if you again grow a little bit older, you don't ever want people to have to come and feel that they have to defend you. Sometimes we'll call it back in the day for people, who have groupies. It's unfortunate, but sometimes students' knowledge or imams, they have groupies where you can't speak to that man and say that there's going to be 10 people trying to jump on you if you're just advising him. So there are other people trying to defend, and I'm like, look, brother, if I said something wrong, please forgive me. And if you want to speak about it, let's sit down and let's speak. But he just wanted to let out whatever he had to let out. Another time coming down the minbar because I said something that offended someone, screaming at me, you're a coward. Those are things that, are you going to go back and forth with that individual? That person is heated and they're calling you a coward. And it's like, you know what? May Allah forgive me if I am, but I got to keep it moving. Because at that moment, it's not worth having that back and forth. I was talking about stocks, and I was mentioning the ayah, الَّذِي جَمَعَ مَالَهُ وَعَدَّدَهُ, right? Those who are collecting their wealth, but I was explaining in the Arabic language, it's not just collecting and looking at it, but there's constant. They're constantly like checking, checking. I mentioned checking your stocks. Like every 1-2 minutes, people. I didn't know that someone who works in finances and deals with stocks like that, he's like, yo, I'm always checking my stocks. And they're just, it's like, man, okay. What I'm getting at is that at that moment, I have to give the benefit of the doubt that brothers and sisters are going through certain things. And I might have said something in a bad way, or it's the way that I have come off. Some younger brothers who have told me, like, this is like 10, 15 years ago, hey man, when you start the khutbah, sometimes you be scaring us because you sound like the Terminator robotic. Like, so I had to catch myself. One of my teachers one time, after he heard that I was giving a rough khutbah, and this is again in my 20s, we're outside, and he's like, hey, correcting me, and I'm kind of going back and forth, like, no, you got to speak the truth. When we're young, when we're hyped up, and no, man, we got to speak the truth. And he's like, and he got right in my face, his nose touching my nose, and he goes, "Do you like this?" And he's talking to me, right, and he's in my face. Do you like this feeling? And I'm like, no. And people are driving by, and I'm like, man, I hope they don't think that, me and him or something, right? I'm serious. And he's like, yeah, he's not, he was born Muslim. And he knows I have my issues in Jahiliyyah. So he's like, yeah, you didn't like that back in the day, right? You'll be like in that person's face or you'll be fighting right now, right? I'm like, yeah. Still having a conversation like this. He goes, just know this is how people feel when you're yelling at them. And he just backed off. And I was like, okay, he got his point across, right? I have my own way of speaking. I'm not saying I changed everything, my whole approach, and everything, but it made me aware, right? Of it's not always them, right? It's not always the people. It's myself. What do I need to do to improve? That's why it hit me when reading the statement of Imam Shafi, rahimahullah. It's like, man, something that would have been nice to have read 20 something years ago. But alhamdulillah, there's people on your path that are there to advise you. The question at hand is when we're getting advice, even from our teachers. I've seen it when we as students will be rough with our own teachers. after we became a certain position, if you want to look at it that way. After we are known, maybe we're more known than our own teachers. And our teachers come up to us and like, hey, we're like, blow them off. It's like, and that's happened to sometimes with me now, being a person who has taught others, you're advising, and they just, you see them like blowing you off. You're like, wow. So in all of that, we have to be very careful in how we interact with people, in the way that we view people advising us, speaking to us. And one of the last things I'd like to mention is how we don't even give the benefit of doubt to our own selves. Imam Shafi, rahmatullah alayhi, as I was giving this example, he showed the confidence that he had. And a lot of times we have our own issues internally when it comes to our confidence, and we try to mask it sometimes in the way that we speak or the way we approach things. And we don't really look uh, within our own selves and try to fix uh, these issues that we have, and being very patient with with our own selves. And again, giving your own self the benefit of the doubt that, yeah, right. And you know your own self. I'm going to make mistakes. Right? We know the hadith of the Prophet. "Kullu bani Adam khata'un wa khayru khata'in at-tawwabun." Right? All of Bani Adam sin. They all make errors. This is constant. We're always going to, uh, or not using the word always, we're going to at times say things even when we're teaching where we may make uh, an error in the, if we're saying something in an ayat in the Quran, someone corrects us. We say a hadith, right, incorrectly, someone corrects us. It's going to happen. As someone who performs marriages at least twice, and the many, many, I'm not happy about it, right? I have to, again, forgive myself and be patient, and then think about, what did I do wrong? 2 times I mentioned either the groom or the bride, their name incorrectly throughout my giving the, reminder. Instead of saying brother and sister, I was just kept saying sister so-and-so and brother so-and-so, and I kept saying the sister's name wrong. And it hurt me even more because her family was not Muslim. So after the first time, it was funny. Like, they corrected me. The second time, it was like, oh, come on, man. The third time, after I finished, the auntie came to me, meaning her aunt was not Muslim. She said, you couldn't just remember her name, right? It's like, man. And I remember walking out of there like, man, so early on, but man, I never want to perform marriage. I'm just upset with myself, right? But again, we don't forgive our own selves. We forget that we're going to need to be humbled at times in order for us to remember how to interact with our Lord in a more humbling way, and how to interact with other human beings as well. HUsn Dhan, brothers and sisters, is something that, again, is something that you'll see constantly come up, just like the Nia reminder that I gave a few months ago. This is something that you'll constantly face. And no better time than on the day of Jummah, where the Prophet ﷺ said there's an hour where the dua is answered, where we ask Allah Azza wa Jal to help us, number one, have better thoughts of Him, and help us continuously do good deeds for Him in order to have husn dhan of Him. And then also thinking well of our brothers and sisters, knowing the responsibility that we have as educators. Because if we say something against somebody, right, let's just say we didn't give someone the benefit of the doubt, and we say something about that individual, that holds weight. Let it forget for a moment. I'm not saying that as a belittling part. I'm just saying, for a moment, we're not talking about the akhirah. We're talking about on this earth. When a person is going to warn against someone, right? And this is something else that happens within our community. Don't go sit with her, don't sit with him, all this stuff. If one is going to warn about, because the Prophet ﷺ and excuse me, the Imam Malik mentioned to us, right, that this learning of the Deen is the learning the Deen of Islam is religion. So pay attention to and be aware of who you learn your religion from. So we just don't take from anybody. Just because someone on YouTube or some speaker says something and we just like Imam or Sheikh has said, and we just take it. As students of knowledge, we're required to go research the information. Now you can trust a person and say, okay, I trust that individual, but doesn't mean that everything that they say is gold, right? Or it's true. So what I'm getting at is when it comes to these matters and saying something about somebody, know that we're going to be not only questioned by Allah about it, but how many people did we affect by saying something that if it wasn't true, Allahu musta'an, just like if the um uh, the slander the slander of our mother radiallahu anha. We don't ever want to be a people that started fitna in community, that we started you know, arguments, and we know how things have changed for us who are older, right? How things have changed in the past 20 years, where it'd be a little argument amongst ourselves in the masjid, and now, right, it's all on WhatsApp and Telegram and everything else, right? Where it just goes all over the place, and people are fighting against each other, especially now what we see in the what's happening in the community, where who's voting for who and who's taking this position, and it becomes a great responsibility for the one who's educating to know when to speak and when not to speak. And if they're going to say something, they better come with some dalil, with some proof. Is that what my sheikh said? Is that what my teacher said? Is what did the Allah say? And what did the Prophet ﷺ say? And what did the companions say? And then, of course, the great imams. But we're not talking about just opening our mouths when it comes to these affairs. So let us, you know, be aware of the importance of um, this act of worship. And, you know, we pray that Allah Azza wa Jal assists us through this process. Ameen, and forgives us for any of our shortcomings. I don't know if there's any comments or questions. The door is open. Or not. Or online, I don't know how.
And not a question, but I really like how you address like having husn then of Allah, yourself, and other people. Because I feel like sometimes I've heard this before where people talk about other people, and I haven't heard as much opponents about having it about yourself. That's also something that's important. Like if it's uh, like
Yeah.
like how we need to be humbled at times, but also how we need to be confident in ourselves too.
I don't know, my bad. Maybe it's my hearing. It felt like I broke up. Did you ask something? My bad. Yeah.
Oh
Or
no,
you
I was
just
just
making a
saying
comment?
like I
My
really
bad.
liked
Okay.
yeah.
Oh,
I
okay.
don't know. Exactly.
No, I appreciate it, Aki. No, for what?
You clarify for someone who might be confused if I were to say, like you were talking about raising some of the kids, they might forget about his compassion or his mercy. What if they get to a point where they think he's cool, for instance? Can you clarify how that goes with the hadith where he is as you, I am as you think I am? What if a person gets to thinking God is cool? How does he let all these things happen?
That's a good question. And the way that you asked the question is similar to, as I mentioned before, a lot of brothers and sisters, be young or even my age, male and female, who I spoke to some of them who pretty much were the border on the edge of leaving Islam or had left it, and they'll explain. And these are one of the reasons why is believing that Allah was cruel, uh, or that he was unjust. And again, it depends on who you're speaking to. But I would ask the question, when I was conversating with these brothers and sisters, I would always ask the question about what is, first and foremost, how did you learn about Allah when you were growing up? So then it gives a little more insight to me. And then a lot of times it's very superficial, so, very minimum information. And then I ask them, especially those who are still Muslim, can you name me three things that you can say that Allah had, something good that Allah has done for you? Just to see if there's anything there, like a positivity. So many times it's just almost flipping it on them. It's like, okay, Allah is, or thinking of Allah in a negative way. Are you saying that basically all of your life, everything that has that's happened to you has been negative? Is that what you're saying? So sometimes it's just kind of bringing them back and then asking them mention some things that Allah has blessed you with that you say is positive. And then I start to go into either like, I'm blessed with good parents, right? So then I go into that whole journey of for them, right? To start to talk about their parents and that who was the one that placed them there. Allah had willed, right, for them to be your parents and for them to raise you in a certain way. And then you start to dissect about, what is the issues that they're having, right? And many times, again, it's just part of it being not knowing who Allah is, and then all of these things that they're watching and internalizing themselves, especially those brothers and sisters who may have not, had like a rough upbringing, right? So many times they'll mention, I just started to internalize either what people, my friends, what they were going through, or internalizing what was going on in society. And it just became negative within myself. So a lot of times it's just taking, extracting from them what is their viewpoint about, what's going on in the world, to what is their viewpoint about Allah, how did they learn about it, and then of course mentioning some, positive things about their Lord and like tying in to that. And many times after having those discussions, many of these brothers and sisters start to at least um, at least take the initiative uh, to go towards more, either a better environment or start to want to learn a little bit more. And one of the reasons why environment is such a key thing in all this, uh, unfortunately, sometimes even our communities might not have this. Uh, that's why I love Sohba and what it does and has done for the past, like what, 6, 7 years, is that it has an environment of positivity. But it's not just positivity and just everything is, it's not just roses and, and flowers. It's um, even in those challenges that we're going through, that you always are trying to take out the thing that is going to make you a better person in that negativity. So it's not a cookie like a cutter, answer. It's really digging into the person's psyche and really seeing where they are and what their background is. And real quickly, like for example, I remember talking to one girl who's Christian, and she was half South Asian, half something else. And how did she get there? And she goes, all I learned about Islam was hellfire and punishment, and then when I found out about Jesus, it's all about love and sacrifice. You know, so then I started talking to her about the names of Allah and the characteristics of the Prophet ﷺ, and she's like, "Oh, that sounds like Jesus." And I sat there, I was in my man. She never learned when she was young. She just never. I'm not saying that the environment was wasn't negative, but there wasn't. That's the key about being a good teacher. You never know, that good teacher could have just sat with her, right, and gave her a different outlook. Uh, but it was an interesting conversation because that was the first time her ever hearing something positive about Allah and the Prophet Sallallahu. And then, from my point of view, was like, and that's why I still love Jesus, right? It's because he is, no doubt, he is that, right? Alayhi salatu salam. But putting it all together, it was Allah who gave them that, and just went in on that. So yeah, it's again just different perspectives in the way that you deal with people. Yes, it's
Like to comment on that a little bit. I also come from a Christian background, but some of the communities are, I find them so, of course, not all, some can also, but the thing that is attractive about the Christian community thing today is that when you go into them, you find that for the most part, they are following the Son of Jesus. And when they're following the Son of Jesus, they're very welcoming, they're very loving, and all of that. And in the Muslim communities, sometimes we're a little bit transactional and like, oh, just gotta go do my salat, go this, that. So we don't always emphasize the Son from Salah. And when you emphasize that, the true Son of them, then of course we will learn about the love and all of those things. You'll feel it, you'll feel it. And the other thing is, I think there is a hadith. It talks about, the characteristics of Allah, the attributes, and that His mercy is much more weightier
and his wrath.
If you can just mention about that, because I feel like that's something that I learned later in life, and it was just I felt like it was so empowering.
No, and I really appreciate you remind me of that. Excuse me. Yeah, where the Prophet ﷺ said that, Allah states that his mercy overpowers or overcomes his wrath. And even connecting to that, where his true mercy will be shown on the day of judgment, right? Only one part of his mercy is on this earth, right? And the rest he's kept with him. And he gave the example of the animal about to sit on or different examples. One of them was the animal about to sit on her baby, and she doesn't, out of instinct and mercy of Allah, she doesn't, crush her child. So when one really thinks about that, it's like I've thought about it like, man, the person who really gets punished, Allahu Mustaan, because if all of this mercy that we see on this earth right now, right? All of this mercy that we see is only a small part of it. And then on the day of judgment, we're going to see it's, at its fullest form, for lack of better words. We underestimate, right, Allah's, again, not thinking well of it, is mercy, or not really putting it into context of not only our lives, but everyone else who exists right now and whatever challenges that they're facing. And it shows that Allah, and again, this is something that the Christians do use a little bit more, but it's not emphasized enough to a certain degree about Allah being Al-Wadud, right? Being the one who's a source of love. And how the Prophet ﷺ, when asked why would he pray to the point where his ankles would swell up? He said, well, should I not be a thankful servant, right? Because Allah forgave all his sins. Even with that, how it's Allah who was so merciful to the Prophet ﷺ that he forgave all his errors, right? And he still excelled in his worship. That is something that, again, we underestimate when it comes to our servitude of Allah. Just having that joy and having that spirit of wanting people to succeed, wanting people to at least have information about the akhirah, right? Obviously, we cannot save anyone, but at least giving them opportunity to hear about salvation. And I really hope that what comes out of it, and has changed, I'll speak specifically about Houston, is that Houston as a city, and I don't travel as much, but I have traveled enough to know that when it comes to some Islamic centers, uh, that plays a role in helping a person heal, right? And have a connection with Allah. Is a place where, again, they feel safe and they feel welcomed and they feel that they're not judged. And they can be properly corrected if needed. This is something that um, just recently I went to a community in South Florida. Uh, Allah Mustan. The talk was convert care. And myself and the mother brother who I traveled with, uh, the doors were wide open. People were preparing for the event, and because the doors were wide open, we didn't see no shoes allowed. When you walk in, so we walked in with our shoes, and it didn't take but 30 seconds for someone just being really rude to the other brother. Get your not salams, not kayf al hal. Get your shoes out of here. I'm sitting there like, man. I'll give it to my brother. His name was Alex. He was nice. Just put it up. I was like, nah. I came to meet it. I said, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. What is wrong with you, brother? That you're going to speak to people this way. I could not believe it. I said, do you know the talk is going to be about convert care? And you just did that in front of a non-Muslim. So we have a lot of healing to do within the community. So what I hope is that having better balance, let's say, educators and community members are able to bring that spirit of the Prophet ﷺ back, meaning the spirit of, uh, um, taking care of people. As you said, Bashiru la tunafiru wa yasiru wa tu'asiru. Give God tidings and don't turn people away. Make it easy and don't make it difficult. That is something missing within our community. So that is a mercy of Allah, right? That has brought down an example like the Prophet, as we see from the Prophet ﷺ, to able to live that out. And then when we do live that out, we see how that has a way more positive effect in the community. In that, then people can have discussions and disagree even in healthy ways. Jazakallah.
Assalamu alaikum. I have a question.
Yes.
Um, Speaking of mercy of Allah, I think a lot of us have been brought up the same way where you say we always have been told about the wrath of Allah and not the mercy of Allah. So it goes into our adulthood as we grow up. How do we forgive? I know you started with that and you gave us some tips, but to internalize, how do we forgive ourselves for past mistakes? I know Allah is very merciful. He forgives us, but as humans wanting to be, not perfectionists, but, to do better, how do we really internalize and work on ourselves and forgive ourselves for past mistakes and move on? I remember one scholar had once mentioned that maybe you can put it on the qadr of Allah, but I guess I just didn't understand how much is qadr and how much can we, there's got to be a formula to move on. So if there's any advice you can give on that, I'd be really grateful.
I really appreciate your question. And for again, different people, like maybe I don't know, again, maybe in more detail what the Sheikh was saying about putting and looking at it from the point of view of the qadr of Allah, maybe in giving more examples, it might have come out how, from what perspective he was coming from. One thing that impacted me, it was unique, was a dua of Umar radiallahu anhu. And we could speak like this because if we know, in knowing about the life of Umar radiallahu anhu, right? We know before Islam, challenges that he faced, and even being a young Muslim, right? He was in his mid-20s when he became Muslim. Even the way that he would speak out sometimes and be very straightforward, sometimes having to be corrected, radiallahu anhu, he would feel bad when when he would reflect upon how he spoke to the Prophet ﷺ or how he dealt with people. He would feel bad. And one dua that, to me, it was his own dua. So it's like he was internalizing it or trying to excuse me, heal from that, was Allahumma inni da'ifun fakowini, Allahumma inni shadidun falayyini, wa Allahumma inni bakhilun fasakhini. If I'm not mistaken. He said, "Oh Allah, I am weak, so make me strong. Oh Allah, I am shadid, I am harsh, so make me soft. Oh Allah, I am stingy, so make me generous." And what hit me about that dua personally was that when you look at, I don't remember him not being generous, right? But as human beings, right, you can just relate to, I am weak, right? Allahumma inni da'ifun fakowini, right? So we're weak, so strengthen me. So that shows a part of humility from his part, because everyone looks at Umar radiallahu anhu as someone strong, but he recognized his own weaknesses. And then he went on to something that, people also say about him. I mean, even the women companions said about him, right? About him being stern, right? But even recognizing that, and the Prophet ﷺ praised his strength, right? Where he said, if Umar's walking on one side, the shayateen or the shaitan is walking on the other, just to show, right, mashallah, his strength. But he knew that didn't play well all the time with everyone. That didn't always resonate well with everyone. So, Allah, I am stern or tough or shadid, so make me softer. Make me lay in. And I was like, man, that one, really hit me, that statement, that particular one hit me, pretty strong, because you're really recognizing your own weaknesses. And what we tend to forget is not asking, I know it sounds, it's kind of repeating what you said, like Allah being merciful, but really it's asking Allah to continuously forgive us for what we do wrong, and us being able to express the pain or the challenges that we're going through, and asking Allah to help us and to heal us. And then going even deeper, like again, where have we forgiven others? Sometimes we may even look at our own selves, but have we forgiven others? Like if we've had issues with our parents, let's just say, have we forgiven them? If we had issues with our siblings, have we forgiven them? And how those, even let's just say if our parents or our siblings or someone like that, a friend or a former friend, you can almost say scarred us. How do we let that go? Right. And I'll say this, sister, it's a ongoing, constant journey. It is. It's someone's a little, maybe a little older, I'm assuming. It's an ongoing journey of having to constantly look at, like, wow, I am the way that I am because of certain, maybe that in the qadr, like certain things happened in my life. And then, okay, I'm able to be that way, but I'm really, again, I may be tough with my children for these other reasons, right? If, let's just say, the men in my life were not known to show respect to the opposite gender, and then I made it a mission in life to never be that way. But if I see, my brother or my cousin or community member being tough, being disrespectful to women, now the way that I advise that person, I may come off really harsh on it. I've had to check myself in the way that I deal with men. My daughter can attest, I'm tougher on my sons than I am on my daughters, right? Usually it's the opposite way, right? In some cultures, I'm tough with my sons, but to a point where I have to be like, man, And then my wife would say, "You're tough on the brothers," and then I have to check myself constantly on that. So like forgiving, like almost saying, forgiving the persons who played a role in me being that tough individual that doesn't always have to be tough. So just different ways of analyzing oneself. I don't know if that helped, but Allah knows best.
May I add a comment?
Jazakallah.
Parada, I think as an older person who's raised 4 kids, I think you get to a lot of points. I've gotten to a lot of points where you wonder, how do I forgive myself for some of the mistakes I've made? And I think it goes back to what Brother Parada was what we're talking about today is to understand, to know your Lord Azza wa Jal as best as you can, especially the parts where he's maintained the 99 or the majority of his mercy with himself. And you rely on, once you get to know that concept well, you rely on it and remind yourself, if I may remind you of a dua, Allahumma maghfiratuka awsa'a min dhanbi. Oh Allah, your forgiveness is far more encompassing and wider than my sins. And I have more hope in your mercy than in my own deeds. So instead of trying to think of what can you do, what actions and deeds only can you take, also put some focus into the fact that he is that merciful. He is indeed that willing to give his mercy off to his creation, to his Muslims, so that you put more reliance on that. I think you might achieve a better outcome instead of just depending on what can you do to get there.
So
I don't know if that
Jazakallah.
helps.
Thank you. Jazakallah.
Yeah.
Thank you. What is that dua again that you were saying, brother?
Oh Allah, your mercy is far wider than my sins.
Okay, I'll look that up. Jazakallah. Thank you so much too.
My daughter will send it to you in just a minute.
Jazakallah.
Yeah.
I know I've gone over my time, so
Jazakallah.
oh yeah.
Thank you so much.
So with that, inshallah, I'll end here, and may Allah Azza wa Jal continue to assist you, brothers and sisters, in this journey of uh, gaining knowledge, and may Allah bless you to practice what you've learned. I mean, bless your families who are supporting you in this, and grant them and you all the highest level of Jannah. I mean, to your instructors, and I mean, and may Allah help our brothers and sisters who are suffering all around the world. I mean, wa jazakumullah khair. Wa subhanaka wa bihamdik. Wa ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Wa astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
May Allah give you a beautiful grandbaby. MashaAllah.
Ameen. Ameen.
Good health to the one.
Ameen. Ameen. Jazakallah. Barakallah. Ahsan ilayk. Barakallah. Gracias, hermano. No. I like it. I like it.
It's on in Spanish though, but now that you've said that.
So yeah, 2 weeks from tomorrow we have our grand opening. So, yeah. So we have Juma now. Juma on our Sundays. But the grand opening, inshallah, 2 weeks from tomorrow.
You're gonna start extra programs.